It was a bright morning when the new maid stepped out of the taxi and looked up at the enormous mansion towering in front of her. The gates were tall, golden, and slightly intimidating, with intricate patterns that glinted under the sun. She took a deep breath, clutching her bag tightly, knowing that today could be very different from any other job she had done before. Rumors had reached her even before she applied. Whispers about a billionaire who no one had seen fail, and twins who were impossible to manage. Many had tried to work here and left on the first day, but she felt a strange mix of nervousness and excitement. The driveway stretched far ahead, lined with perfectly trimmed hedges and flower beds that seemed like something out of a magazine. The mansion itself was a combination of old-world architecture and modern glass walls, reflecting the sunlight in a dazzling way. She could see the luxury even from outside, the shimmering fountain in the garden, the classic cars parked in a neat row, and the quiet elegance that suggested no ordinary household lived here. She tried to steady her heartbeat as she walked up to the front door, reminding herself that she was ready for the challenge. The front door opened with a soft chime before she could knock, revealing a tall, silent butler who looked at her with a serious expression. "You must be the new maid," he said calmly, his voice low and measured. She nodded politely. "Yes, I am," she replied, trying to sound confident even though her stomach twisted with nerves. The butler gave her a brief once-over, as if he was deciding whether she would survive the day, then stepped aside to let her in. The moment she crossed the threshold, she felt the atmosphere change. The interior was even more stunning than she had imagined, with marble floors that gleamed, chandeliers that sparkled like stars, and furniture that seemed priceless. It was quiet except for the soft ticking of a large antique clock. She realized this was a house of rules, order, and perhaps secrets. She reminded herself to stay calm, observe everything, and not make any mistakes. Almost immediately, she sensed she was being watched. Her eyes were drawn to the living room, where two young twins peeked curiously from behind a velvet curtain. Their eyes were sharp, mischievous, and filled with a kind of energy that made her heart race. She knew instantly that these were the twins people had talked about, the ones no maid had been able to handle. She forced a polite smile, but the children didn't move, only stared, silently assessing her. Then, the billionaire appeared, moving slowly with the help of his cane. His presence was commanding. Even though he was physically disabled, there was a sharpness in his eyes, a careful calculation, as if he was measuring whether she would survive the household or leave like the others. She bowed slightly, greeting him respectfully. "Good morning, sir," she said softly, hoping she sounded composed. He nodded once, without a word, and returned to his seat, leaving her unsure if that was a sign of approval or just indifference. The butler guided her through the mansion, showing her the areas she would be responsible for, explaining in detail the strict schedules, the rules about the twins, and the expectations of the billionaire. She listened carefully, nodding, while taking mental notes. Her mind raced with questions about how she would handle everything, but she reminded herself that confidence and patience would be her best allies. As she walked into the kitchen to meet the other staff, she noticed subtle hints of past chaos, small scratches on the walls, slightly crooked furniture, and old notes pinned on the notice board warning new employees about the twins' pranks. She felt a shiver, realizing that many had come before her with hope and had failed quickly, but she was determined not to be just another name in the list. Finally, she took a deep breath and looked around, feeling a mixture of fear and excitement. She had entered a world that was glamorous, strict, and unpredictable, a place where the ordinary would fail and only the clever, patient, and brave could survive. She straightened her uniform, adjusted her hair, and whispered to herself that today would be different. She was not just here to clean or serve, she was here to endure, observe, and prove herself. And in that moment, the mansion seemed alive, almost challenging her, daring her to show that she could last where no one else had. The door to the twins' playroom creaked open slightly, and she could see their heads pop up, curious and alert. She smiled gently, knowing that her real challenge was about to begin, and the game of patience, wit, and courage had officially started. The new maid had barely settled into the mansion when the twins decided to make their presence known. She had thought the stories about them were exaggerated, but as she stepped cautiously down the grand hallway, she felt eyes on her from every corner. Around her, the chandeliers reflected tiny spots of light that danced across the marble floors, and she couldn't shake the feeling that she was being measured, judged, and tested all at once. From behind a large velvet curtain, the twins appeared suddenly, as if they had materialized out of nowhere. One was a boy with sharp, curious eyes, the other a girl whose mischievous grin seemed to predict trouble. They moved silently, like shadows, observing her every step, and she realized immediately that they were the real challenge, not the billionaire, not the strict schedules, and not the mansion itself. The boy stepped forward first, holding a small toy car, and rolled it quickly across the floor toward her feet. It was harmless at first glance, but the speed and accuracy of his throw suggested he was testing her reactions. She bent slightly, picked up the car carefully, and handed it back with a gentle smile. "Thank you, that's a very fast car," she said softly, hoping to sound friendly. The boy blinked once, then smirked, clearly intrigued, while the girl clapped her hands quietly, as if approving a tiny victory. They began asking questions, rapid fire and clever, each one designed to catch her off guard. "Do you like chocolate or vanilla?" asked the girl, tilting her head like a small detective. "Who is faster, a cheetah or a lion?" The maid paused, thinking carefully before answering each one, her voice calm, patient, and measured. She realized that these were not ordinary children. They were sharp, witty, and testing every boundary, every reaction, and every hint of fear. The billionaire watched silently from a distance, his cane resting across his knees. His eyes never left the new maid, but he said nothing, as if the twins' games were his own test for her. She understood quickly that earning their respect would be just as important as following the rules of the mansion, perhaps more, because this family operated on subtle signals and quiet challenges, and only those who could navigate them would survive. The twins' next move was unexpected. They began moving furniture slightly, hiding small items, and whispering plans to each other. It was a playful chaos, but one that could easily overwhelm someone who wasn't observant. The maid moved carefully, noticing everything, quietly correcting small disruptions without scolding, always keeping a calm smile. She spoke gently to the twins as she returned a pillow to its proper place or repositioned a chair, never showing irritation or impatience. By the end of the morning, a small change was noticeable. The twins stopped their whispering for a moment and watched her carefully, trying to understand who she really was. She had not scolded, raised her voice, or rushed, but she had quietly shown that she could handle the chaos. That small balance of authority and kindness seemed to intrigue them, and for the first time, they began to include her in their tiny world rather than testing her from the outside. Even the billionaire seemed to notice. His eyes softened slightly, though he still remained silent. The new maid had understood something important. Surviving in this house wasn't about following rules blindly, it was about reading people, understanding their moods, and responding with intelligence, patience, and heart. The twins were clever, but they respected subtlety, and she had shown that she could match them without losing her composure. By noon, the mansion no longer felt quite so intimidating. The twins were still mischievous, but their pranks had a new rhythm, one that the maid could anticipate. She smiled quietly to herself, feeling a sense of small triumph. For the first time, she sensed that maybe, just maybe, she could last longer than a single day. She had not only entered the mansion, she had begun to enter their world, and that made all the difference. The day ended with a quiet moment in the garden, the twins chasing each other while she watched, not interfering, and the billionaire reading nearby. His cane rested against the chair, a silent signal that he was approving. The maid took a deep breath, realizing that first impressions were more than appearances. They were about patience, respect, and the courage to face challenges with a calm heart. She knew the real test was just beginning, but for the first time, she felt ready. The morning sun had barely climbed higher when the new maid realized that surviving the mansion would be harder than she had imagined. The twins, who had seemed curious and playful yesterday, were now testing her in ways she hadn't expected. They whispered to each other as she carried trays of breakfast through the vast dining room, their eyes darting mischievously, watching every movement she made. The billionaire observed quietly from his chair, his face calm but unreadable, as if he were waiting to see which direction the first real challenge would take. Her first conflict came in the form of a spilled juice. The boy had intentionally nudged the glass with his foot while she wasn't looking, and it crashed to the floor with a sharp clatter, staining the expensive carpet. Her heart leapt, but she quickly took a deep breath, grabbing a cloth and cleaning it carefully, apologizing gently. "I'll fix this right away," she said softly, hoping her calmness would diffuse the twins' excitement. The girl giggled from behind a chair, clearly pleased with the disruption, but she didn't scold or shout, knowing that anger would only escalate the situation. Next, the twins decided to test her endurance, sending small tasks that seemed simple but were designed to frustrate. They asked for tea while simultaneously demanding breakfast items she had not yet prepared, then interrupted her every attempt to organize the dining room. It was a whirlwind of chaos, and most people would have panicked, dropped items, or shouted in frustration, but she moved deliberately, prioritizing one task at a time, her calm voice guiding the children through small instructions. She had learned quickly that patience was her most powerful weapon. The billionaire's presence added a silent pressure. He rarely spoke, but every glance he gave carried weight, as if he were measuring her ability to handle conflict without complaint. She noticed how he observed the twins' actions and her reactions carefully, and she understood that surviving in this house wasn't just about completing chores, it was about composure, intelligence, and strategy. She felt a quiet determination rise within her, knowing she had to prove herself not only to the twins, but also to the man whose respect meant everything in this household. A small disaster struck when the twins decided to hide one of the silver trays in a corner of the study. She found it missing at a crucial moment, just as she was about to serve breakfast to the billionaire. Panic fluttered briefly in her chest, but she didn't show it. Instead, she retraced her steps, calmly scanning the room, and found the tray behind a stack of books. She returned it carefully, setting it down perfectly in front of him, and the twins' astonishment was palpable. They whispered to each other, clearly impressed, but not yet willing to admit defeat. Even the other staff began to notice the difference. The cook and the butler exchanged quiet glances, commenting on how the new maid handled the chaos without losing her composure. She had quickly understood that in this house, it was not strength or speed that mattered, but observation, intelligence, and the ability to remain calm under pressure. Each early conflict became a lesson, a small opportunity to show resilience and cleverness, and she embraced each challenge as a test she was determined to pass. By afternoon, the twins tried one of their boldest pranks yet, tying small ribbons across doorways and sprinkling water on the floors to create tiny obstacles. They watched eagerly as she walked through the hallways, waiting for her to stumble or complain. She noticed every detail, stepping lightly over the ribbons and wiping the water quietly, giving a small, encouraging smile to the twins. Her calm and clever response began to earn their tentative respect, and the tension in the room shifted slightly. As evening approached, the new maid paused for a moment by the grand staircase, observing the twins laughing quietly at a game they had invented. The billionaire sat nearby, his expression thoughtful, and she realized that her early conflicts were not punishments but opportunities. They were testing her heart, her patience, and her ability to navigate the unpredictable. She felt a sense of quiet triumph, knowing that while the day had been full of challenges, she had handled each one with grace and intelligence, proving, at least to herself, that she was more than capable of lasting in this demanding household. And in that moment, she understood that these early conflicts were only the beginning. The twins and the billionaire were not enemies, but judges, and she was learning the rules of a world where cleverness, patience, and courage were the keys to survival. She smiled quietly to herself, ready for whatever challenges tomorrow would bring, knowing that each obstacle was another step toward becoming indispensable in a place where most had failed within hours. The new maid had faced the chaos of the morning and survived, but she knew that surviving was only the first step. Now came the real challenge, gaining the trust of the twins and earning even a hint of approval from the billionaire. She realized that patience and cleverness would not be enough on their own. She would have to show empathy, understanding, and respect. Something in her heart told her that if she could connect with them, even just a little, the household might finally become manageable. The twins began their games again, but this time they were more subtle, testing her responses rather than creating obvious chaos. The girl placed a small puzzle on the dining table, watching intently as the maid approached, while the boy hid a book behind his back, pretending he had lost it. At first, she paused, observing their actions carefully, then smiled gently and knelt down to solve the puzzle alongside them. "I think this piece goes here," she said softly, guiding the pieces without forcing them, and the twins leaned closer, curiosity replacing suspicion. It was the first moment she sensed a change, a tiny shift in their perception. She didn't scold, she didn't rush, she simply joined them in their little world. showing respect for their creativity while gently steering them toward order. The boy's frown of concentration turned into a grin, and the girl clapped softly, impressed with her patience and attention. The billionaire, seated across the room, noticed the subtle shift, a faint nod acknowledging that she had handled the twins wisely. Throughout the day, she found other ways to earn their trust, learning their favorite games, discovering what made them laugh, and noticing the smallest details about their habits. She remembered what the previous maids had failed to see. The twins were not just mischievous, they were clever, sensitive, and often testing people because they wanted someone who could understand them. She quietly adapted to their pace, offering help when needed and giving them space when they desired it, demonstrating a balance that no one else had managed before. Even the billionaire began to interact more, his voice calm and measured as he asked her questions about the household. "Have you noticed anything unusual in the morning routine?" he asked one afternoon, and she replied thoughtfully, pointing out small adjustments that could make the day smoother. She spoke respectfully but confidently, showing that she was observant, intelligent, and capable of taking initiative. And he seemed to consider her words carefully, something the previous staff had rarely achieved. The turning point came when the twins faced a small accident in the garden, chasing each other and slipping near the fountain. The maid rushed to help, catching them both safely and calming their sudden tears with gentle words and a reassuring presence. She didn't scold, she didn't panic, and she didn't act as if she were above them. Instead, she knelt beside them, comforting them, and making sure they felt safe. The twins looked up at her with wide eyes, a mixture of relief and newfound respect. From that moment, the household atmosphere began to shift. The twins included her in their games rather than plotting against her, testing her less aggressively and listening when she spoke. The billionaire's watchful gaze softened, his approval more visible, and even the other staff seemed to notice a change. Some whispered quietly about how unusual it was for someone to connect so quickly with the twins and handle the billionaire's expectations at the same time. By evening, the new maid walked through the mansion with a quiet confidence she hadn't felt before. The twins followed her with small smiles, occasionally laughing at her gentle teasing or playful responses. The billionaire read in his chair, but there was a sense of calm and order that hadn't been there when she arrived. She realized that gaining trust wasn't about authority, punishment, or strict rules. It was about empathy, attention, and the willingness to meet others where they were. As she prepared for the night, she paused by the grand staircase, watching the twins play quietly and the billionaire glance up at her with a faint, approving nod. She smiled softly, feeling a sense of accomplishment and quiet triumph. Today had not been easy, but she had taken the first real step toward becoming more than just a maid. She was beginning to become part of the household's world, trusted, respected, and slowly indispensable, and for the first time, she truly believed that she could last in this house where others had failed so quickly. The morning had begun like any other, quiet but charged with an unspoken tension. The twins were awake early, whispering and giggling, while the billionaire sat in his study, reading in his usual calm, measured way. The new maid had grown accustomed to the rhythm of the mansion, understanding the small patterns, the moods, and the subtle signals of the household. Yet she knew that real tests often came without warning, and today, she would face one of the most difficult challenges of her time. In the mansion. It started with a sudden cry from the twins' playroom, sharp and urgent. She rushed down the hallway, her heart pounding, only to find the boy had climbed onto a small ledge and slipped slightly, hanging precariously by his hands. The girl was screaming in fear, and the room was in chaos. The maid's mind raced, but she forced herself to stay calm, calculating her movements, assessing the safest way to prevent a disaster. Without hesitation, she moved toward him, speaking gently. "It's okay, I've got you, don't let go," she instructed softly, her voice steady even as her heart raced. She reached just in time to grab his hands, supporting his weight, while keeping her own balance. The twins looked at her with wide eyes, realizing that she was not like the maids who had come before. She didn't panic, she didn't shout, she simply acted, and in that instant, the trust she had slowly built became the difference between chaos and safety. The billionaire appeared at the doorway, his cane in hand, watching silently, but his eyes widened slightly in approval. The maid carefully lowered the boy to the ground, making sure both children were unharmed. The girl threw her arms around the maid, sobbing and thanking her, while the boy gave a shy smile, still gripping her hand for reassurance. It was a moment of pure vulnerability, and she met it with patience, courage, and presence of mind, qualities the household had rarely seen in anyone before. As she comforted the twins, she noticed small but important details. The ledge had been slippery from a spill, a toy had been left in the wrong place, and small distractions had contributed to the accident. She quietly addressed each problem, removing hazards and reorganizing the playroom, all while keeping the children calm and engaged. The twins watched closely, learning from her actions, and the billionaire's gaze lingered on her, thoughtful and approving, though he said nothing, letting her work silently. The rest of the morning was a flurry of activity, as the twins seemed to test her again, but differently this time. They asked tricky questions, hid small items, and created challenges, but she responded with composure, solving problems calmly, guiding them gently, and anticipating their next moves. Even small pranks, like a toy car placed in a precarious spot, were handled with precision and patience, showing the household that she was not easily shaken. By midday, a quiet understanding had formed. The twins no longer tried to trip her or frighten her. Instead, they looked to her for guidance in small ways, testing boundaries but with respect. The billionaire, sitting in his study, finally spoke, asking her how she handled the accident, and she explained each step, her reasoning clear and thoughtful. He nodded once, slowly, a rare gesture of approval that spoke volumes. It was clear she had passed a test that no one else had managed, a test not of chores or obedience, but of courage, intelligence, and quick thinking. The new maid felt a sense of accomplishment unlike anything before. The household had seen her not just as a servant, but as someone capable of managing crises, understanding the children, and maintaining calm in the face of danger. She had proven her worth through action, not words, and the mansion itself seemed to shift subtly in response, the air lighter, the atmosphere calmer, and the twins' mischievous energy less threatening. By evening, she reflected quietly on the events of the day, knowing that the major test had not only been a challenge but also an opportunity. She had learned more about the twins, the billionaire, and herself than any ordinary day could teach. Her confidence grew, and she realized that with courage, patience, and understanding, she could survive, and even thrive. In a household where many had failed within hours, she smiled softly, ready for whatever trials the mansion might bring next, knowing that she had passed the first real test. After the morning's crisis, the atmosphere in the mansion began to shift in subtle ways. The new maid noticed it immediately, a quiet respect in the twins' eyes, a faint acknowledgement from the billionaire. It was not a loud approval or a grand declaration, but a small, almost invisible change that made her realize she had begun to break barriers that no one else had managed before. The twins, who had once hidden behind curtains or tested her with endless pranks, now approached her openly, seeking her company in ways that surprised her. The boy brought his favorite book and asked her to read aloud, while the girl showed her a small drawing she had made, looking for praise and guidance. She knelt beside them patiently, her voice gentle and encouraging. "That's a wonderful story. I think the lion might be brave but the cheetah is faster. What do you think?" she asked the boy. And his eyes lit up with excitement as he answered. Even the billionaire, usually distant and reserved, began to speak more with her, sharing small details about the twins' routines, their favorite foods, and the challenges of managing the household. "They can be clever, sometimes too clever," he admitted one afternoon, his voice quiet but tinged with a rare warmth. She listened carefully, offering thoughtful suggestions and subtle guidance, showing that she was not only capable of following instructions but also understanding the family's needs and dynamics. The maid began taking small initiatives, anticipating the twins' moods before they acted, arranging meals they would enjoy, and preparing activities that would challenge but not overwhelm them. She learned to read their expressions, noticing when frustration or boredom was building, and intervening gently before it became a problem. The twins responded naturally, including her in their games and showing her the kind of trust that had been denied to every maid before her. One afternoon, the billionaire asked her to help organize a small family gathering, a task that required coordination, diplomacy, and patience. She planned the seating, ensured the twins were entertained, and quietly managed every detail, without seeking recognition or approval. Her calm, methodical approach impressed the billionaire, who rarely allowed anyone into his decision-making space. He watched her orchestrate the day with ease, noting her ability to manage both children and staff while keeping the household running smoothly. The twins tested her in new ways, trying to push boundaries in subtle manners, placing a vase slightly off-center, pretending to misplace a small object, but she handled each instance calmly and cleverly, turning potential frustrations into gentle lessons. She never scolded, she never raised her voice, and she never lost patience. The twins began to imitate her actions, learning from her composure and quiet authority, a sign that they were accepting her not just as a maid, but as a guide and protector in their unpredictable world. By evening, the new maid had earned a small but significant victory. The twins laughed openly in her presence, sometimes even seeking her out for comfort or advice. The billionaire's watchful eyes softened as he observed her handling the children with care and intelligence. It was the first time the mansion felt like more than a place of rules and challenges. It now felt like a space where understanding and trust could grow, a place she was slowly becoming a part of. She reflected on the day quietly as she tidied the sitting room, realizing that breaking barriers wasn't about dramatic actions or heroic gestures. It was about patience, empathy, intelligence, and consistency, showing the family, little by little, that she could be relied upon, that she respected them, and that she understood the delicate balance of their household. In doing so, she had begun to rewrite the expectations for anyone who came to work here, demonstrating that success was built on trust, connection, and genuine care. For the first time, the new maid felt a sense of belonging, not as a servant, but as someone who mattered. She had proven herself capable of handling challenges, understanding the children, and quietly earning the respect of a man known for his high standards, and she knew that the foundation she had built today would serve her well for the trials yet to come. The mansion was quiet that morning, but the atmosphere had changed subtly. The twins no longer hid behind furniture or whispered schemes to test the new maid. Instead, they followed her around with curiosity and smiles, seeking her guidance and waiting for her approval in small, meaningful ways. Even the billionaire, who had always maintained a careful distance, now watched her with a mixture of respect and quiet admiration. The other staff began to notice the shift as well. Their eyes followed her as she moved through the hallways, calmly organizing tasks, helping the twins, and anticipating the needs of the household before anyone even spoke. It was a remarkable transformation from the chaos that had defined the mansion when she first arrived. She had not only survived the pranks, the tests, and the strict rules, but she had turned the household into a space of order, patience, and subtle harmony. The twins were the first to show recognition openly. They approached her one afternoon, the girl holding a small flower she had picked from the garden. "This is for you," she said shyly, while the boy nodded in agreement. It was a gesture no previous maid had ever received, a quiet acknowledgement of trust and respect. The maid accepted the flowers with a warm smile, kneeling to speak to them gently. "Thank you, that's very thoughtful of you," she said softly, and the twins beamed, clearly proud of themselves for giving her the gift. Even the billionaire spoke to her more openly than ever before, inviting her into small discussions about household plans and decisions. "I noticed how you handled the twins yesterday," he said quietly one afternoon, his eyes focused and serious. "It was unlike anything anyone else has done. You didn't just follow instructions, you understood them, guided them, and earned their respect." The new maid bowed slightly, feeling a swell of pride, knowing that this was not casual praise, but recognition from a man whose standards were famously impossible. The other staff members began treating her differently as well. No longer merely another employee, she became the quiet authority of the mansion, her presence calming tensions and organizing chaos. Even small conflicts between staff members were resolved subtly under her guidance. The twins followed her example, mirroring her patience, her careful observation, and her gentle authority, and for the first time, the household seemed to move as one, rather than in fragmented, unpredictable chaos. By evening, the new maid realized that her position in the mansion had shifted dramatically. She was no longer simply surviving, she was leading, guiding, and shaping the environment around her. The twins played freely, laughing openly in her presence, sometimes even seeking her advice or comfort. The billionaire observed quietly, occasionally nodding or commenting on her initiatives, a rare sign of approval that marked her as exceptional in a household where most had failed in hours. The most significant change came when the twins included her in a private moment, showing her their secret drawings, games, and plans. Trusting her not to scold or laugh at them, she listened, guided them gently, and celebrated their creativity, reinforcing the connection that had grown slowly but steadily. the billionaire watched from a distance, seeing how she had not only managed the children but had built a bridge between authority and affection, a feat that few could achieve. By the end of the day, the mansion felt different, lighter, and more harmonious. The new maid stood in the grand hallway for a moment, observing the twins laughing together, the staff moving efficiently, and the billionaire quietly reading, and she realized that her consistent patience, intelligence, and empathy had transformed the household. She had earned recognition not through force, obedience, or strictness, but through understanding, care, and subtle leadership. For the first time, she felt secure in her role, knowing that she had achieved something remarkable. She had broken barriers, gained trust, and earned respect from everyone in the mansion, proving that true recognition came not from speed or strength, but from wisdom, empathy, and quiet perseverance. And she knew, deep in her heart, that this was only the beginning of her journey in a household that now accepted her as indispensable. The mansion had never felt quieter, yet in that stillness, there was a sense of achievement, a subtle harmony that had been absent for years. The new maid walked through the hallways with a confidence she had never known, her head held high, knowing that she had not only survived the challenges of the household but had transformed it completely. The twins ran past her laughing, their trust and affection now apparent in every glance and gesture. And even the billionaire, usually reserved and distant, seemed to radiate a quiet satisfaction. She paused in the grand foyer, looking around at the gleaming floors, the carefully arranged furniture, and the subtle order of the mansion. It was a place that had once been chaotic, full of tension and tests, but now it moved with a rhythm she had helped create. The twins waved from the staircase, their eyes sparkling with mischief yet laced with respect, and she smiled softly, realizing that her patience, empathy, and intelligence had earned their hearts, not just their obedience. The major test, the early conflicts, and the slow building of trust had all led to this moment. The mansion was no longer a place where maids failed within hours. It was a home where she had carved a place for herself, proving that one person's courage and care could change even the strictest, most challenging environment. She reflected on the journey, the spills, the pranks, the crises, and understood that each obstacle had been a lesson, each challenge a chance to show not just competence but compassion. The twins approached her, holding hands and looking up with shy smiles. "Will you play with us?" the boy asked, and she nodded, kneeling beside them, engaging in their games with a mixture of playfulness and guidance. She encouraged their creativity, celebrated their successes, and gently redirected them when their mischief went too far. Each interaction strengthened their bond, reinforcing the trust that had taken weeks to build, and making her role in the household not just necessary but cherished. The billionaire watched quietly from his chair, observing the way she moved through the mansion, how she handled the twins, and how she interacted with the staff. His eyes softened as he saw the results of her dedication, realizing that she had become indispensable, not through obedience or fear, but through intelligence, empathy, and a willingness to understand the family's needs. He finally spoke, his voice calm yet warm. "You've changed this house in ways no one else could. You are capable, reliable, and you've earned their trust completely," and she felt a quiet pride swelling within her. Even the staff noticed the change, no longer merely workers in a rigid hierarchy. They began cooperating, following her example, and finding the mansion easier to manage because of her influence. The twins looked up to her with respect and admiration, turning to her first in moments of uncertainty or joy, and she realized that she had achieved what others could not. She had become part of the family's world without ever overstepping, without demanding recognition, simply by being patient, clever, and kind. By evening, she walked to the balcony overlooking the garden, the sun casting golden light over the mansion. She reflected on the long journey, from arrival and early challenges to crises, tests, and finally, transformation. Each step had been difficult, yet rewarding. Each conflict had taught her something new about courage, strategy, and empathy. She realized that triumph was not about being perfect, but about showing resilience, understanding, and a willingness to face every challenge with a calm heart. As she watched the twins chasing each other in the garden, laughing freely, and the billionaire quietly observing with approval, she knew she had reached the ultimate goal. She was no longer just a maid in a mansion of chaos. She was a trusted, respected, and cherished part of the household, someone who had endured, learned, and ultimately triumphed where others had failed. And in that moment, she smiled softly, feeling the deep satisfaction of having changed lives, earned respect, and transformed the household with nothing but her heart, her mind, and her courage. The mansion was no longer intimidating, no longer a place of endless tests and failures. It was a home, warm and organized, alive with trust and laughter, and she had made it that way. Her journey had ended not with fame or reward, but with something far more powerful, the triumph of connection, respect, and love, and she knew, as she turned toward the twins and the billionaire, that she had achieved the impossible in a house where no maid had lasted a day.